It ain't over till it's over, but this time it's over. Welcome everybody to this special edition of the Cleanup Spot presented by Baseball Essential. My name is Gershon Rabinowitz alongside Brian Danuff. Usually I close shows by saying it's time to say goodbye, but tonight I'm opening this one by saying it's time to say goodbye to an icon, to a Hall of Famer, to a legend in both Yankees history and baseball history, as Yogi Berra passes away at the age of 90. He was a member of 10 World Series championship teams, won 3 MVP awards, kind of terrific coaching career, managerial career with multiple teams. Brian, this is really a sad day in Yankee history and in baseball history as yet another icon of the sport leaves this world.
Yeah, and, I wouldn't even so much stop there when you talk about baseball and the Yankees. Yogi Berra was an American icon and a global icon for just everything he stood for, just his class, his immense talent, his philanthropy, his kindness. Yogi Berra had such a successful, amazing life on and off the field. Anything he did turned to gold. And he was just such a beacon of hope and a great Yankee that no matter who you are, you knew who Yogi Berra was and what he had done in his career. And his passing, it's one of those deaths where even though you didn't know him, you feel like you did. And it came as a shock, and of course there's immediate grief and sadness. And, of course, we are going to be mourning his passing for the weeks, months, and years to come. But the good thing about this is it also gives us a chance to reminisce about all the great things he did, about all the great moments he was a part of, and just about how many lives he touched, how many Yankee teams he influenced, not only during his playing career, not even during his coaching career, but even in his post-professional baseball life, coming into spring training as a special advisor and helping young players adjust to the New York spotlight. There was nothing this man wouldn't do for the Yankees organization, and there was also nothing the Yankees organization wouldn't do for him. It was a very special bond. It was a very beautiful bond. And just to also mention again, with the American hero, he is a war hero as well. Of course, was part of that D-Day invasion during World War II, and along with many other Major League Baseball players, you can look at his stats, and even stopping there would still put him up there as a legend. But when you factor in all that other stuff, especially, of course, a veteran of World War II, a great coach, a great person, and an incredibly long and loving life, and especially his marriage to his wife Carmen Berra, who passed away a year ago. Just a life very well lived and a life to be celebrated, not a loss to be mourned.
Celebrate a life of a legend, of somebody that when you look at celebrities, usually you think about ego, they think of themselves, but this is a guy that thought of other people, somebody that it didn't matter that he was in the spotlight. He treated everybody the same way, and one of the few people that nobody said a bad word about. Everybody loved this guy, and not just with the New York Yankees. He worked with the Houston Astros. He was a bench coach for 4 years. He was with the New York Mets as a manager, as a coach. He transcended baseball, and you mentioned about his service as an American hero. He won a Purple Heart for that. In World War II, fighting for D-Day, he didn't want the accolades and not want the recognition because he didn't want to worry his mother. Because a Purple Heart is typically awarded to somebody who gets injured in the line of duty. And that really shows you what type of character and what type of person Yogi Berra was.
Yeah, people immediately point to just his fun-loving character. He was one of those guys, too, like you said, didn't have an ego. And not only that, he felt like your everyday guy. He didn't feel, not to... people would make fun of his looks. He wasn't the most, attractive person out there. He was quoted as saying that himself. He said he couldn't believe that someone as beautiful as Carmen would love someone like him. And, he he seems so down to earth and relatable. There is not one bad thing I think anyone could ever say about him or have anything to say about him. And you just immediately also think of all those quotes, all those countless of quotes that, you know, not all the things, he didn't say all the things that he said. And just, he has a whole book of those quotes, Yogi-isms they're called, and they apply, it's kind of a novelty, but at the same time you think about them and they make sense. You can apply them to different parts of your life. And Yogi was just an amazing person and a true legend in every sense of the word.
And when you think about baseball, you always think about the language and the lexicon and some of the quotes and meanings and phrases that go on. And we have a guy at Baseball Central, our colleague Corey Fallon, has a terrific Twitter account called Baseball Quotes, where he posts different photos of different players and things that they said throughout their careers. And that thing has had about over 100,000 followers. And when you look at Yogi Berra, everything that he said, it might have sounded awkward and weird in the beginning, but then when you started to think about it, it started to resonate. It started to make a lot of sense. And the most famous one was in 1973 when he was the Mets manager, and that team was just above 500, trying to compete to make it to the postseason, eventually got to the World Series, National League champion, and he said, "It ain't over till it's over." And that's the one that we open with here tonight on the show, Deja Vu all over again. That was another one. I usually take a 2-hour nap from 1 to 4. We make too many wrong mistakes. You could observe a lot by watching. If you find a fork in the road, take it. Baseball is 90% mental, the other half is physical. All of those different phrases, they all personify Yogi Berra and the personality that he had and the camaraderie that he had with the teammates that he came through the Yankee system with and won 10 World Series championships with.
Yeah, and, there was just a bunch of, of course, nowadays we get our news through social media. We get all these stats. We don't have to look too far to see someone posting them on social media. Those 10 World Series championships. Now, of course, they weren't won by himself, but if Yogi Berra was a team, he would rank third among all Team Major League Baseball teams in championships, right behind the Cardinals 11. He just was such a champions player. Wasn't devoid of faults. Obviously he is well known. He is well documented as being in the 1960 World Series when the Pirates walked off in Game 7. And Yogi as well, the famous steal of home plate by Jackie Robinson that Yogi Berra argued probably until his very last day that Jackie was out. There's a good thing that it'll finally be settled up there, whatever that means. But, Yogi Berra he transcended the sport. He was such a lover of baseball, so passionate about keeping the game going and educating the next generation of baseball fans. Of course, he opened up the widely popular Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center in New Jersey. I have not yet gone there. That is something I have always wanted to do. It's a museum. It teaches kids about the game, not just his career, but everything about baseball. It's like a Hall of Fame, but just a little south of Cooperstown, and it's a great place to go. Yogi trained countless of future Yankees in spring training. He would come down and help. He had a big influence on Jorge Posada's career as he transitioned to a catcher when he moved from second base, in the minor leagues. There are just so many stories that you can go to. I mean, Ron Guidry was very close with him. Of course, he was one of his coaches in the 1970s, the 77 and 78 seasons. Along with that coaching staff with Bucky Dent and Elson Howard. You bring up Elson Howard. He was one of those players who was very accepting and welcoming of him as the first African-American Yankee. I mean, there is just a list that can go on, and we would be here for hours upon hours talking about all the great things he did. And there's just truly no understating how much he did for the game and how much he's going to be missed, but how much he should be celebrated and honored as well.
And you mentioned about the museum in Montclair, New Jersey that opened up in 1999. That was the site of where he had the reconciliation with owner George Steinbrenner. For those who don't know, Yogi Berra did not step foot in Yankee Stadium for 14 years because he was fired by George Steinbrenner in 1985 as Yankee manager. After just 16 games into the season, the Yankees did not have their full lineup. Ricky Henderson was out for some time, and he had the assurance from Steinbrenner that he was going to last the entire season. Remember that George fired managers like it was a bodily function, as George Costanza said on Seinfeld. And in 85, he didn't have the full complement of players, and they expected him to last the entire season. They had a road trip in Chicago, and Steinbrenner didn't fire him directly. It was the general manager, Clyde King, one of Steinbrenner's advisors, and Yogi felt that was impersonal, that wasn't right, and he said, as long as George Steinbrenner owns this ball club, I am not stepping foot in Yankee Stadium. His grandkids did not come to Yankee Stadium. He did not have any association with the Yankees, and it was the WFAN broadcaster Susan Waldman, who currently does the games on the radio, who brokered the peace treaty with Berra, with Steinbrenner at the Montclair Museum. And in 1999, on July 18th, the Yankees celebrated Yogi Berra Day. Number 8 was painted on the field. Yogi was there with all of his former teammates and players, and then he took a lap around the field, going in a car at the warning track, going around the field, celebrating, making a speech. He caught the ceremonial first pitch from Don Larson, commemorating Game 5 of the 1956 World Series, when Larson threw the only perfect game to date in World Series history. And then right after that, David Cohn throws a perfect game against the Montreal Expos. That was the first Yankees win that I ever saw in person. I was 8 years old at the time. It's something that I always remember, because I never saw the Yankees win a game in person. I decided to go to that game because they were facing the Expos. They weren't very good at the time. Thought I would see something special, and I guess I did that day. And that was really my first recollection and really understanding what Yogi Berra meant to the Yankee organization.
Well, you mentioned the fact that you were 8 years old, and of course I was one. There was quite an age difference on this show, but David Cohn, at the end of his outing, he had thrown also 88 pitches, and I find that just so amazing. The whole day was unbelievable. As someone who doesn't remember it, it just I wouldn't believe it even if I was watching it. And Yogi Berra was there's not a limit to the good things people can say about him, and it's amazing. And when you do think about his passing, he was 90 years old. He reportedly died in his sleep. That is a long, full life of just great moments from beginning to the end. And it's just fascinating, because we were talking about this a little before the show went on, that Yogi's passing is truly an end of an era. He is really the last of that illustrious Yankee core of the entire franchise in terms of its history. You immediately think of these single-digit Hall of Fame legends like Babe Ruth, Joe DiMaggio, Lou Gehrig, Mickey Mantle. Yogi Berra is always in that same discussion. And, of course, everyone else at this point has passed away. Yogi actually met Babe Ruth. Yogi, of course, bumped elbows with Mickey Mantle, with Joe DiMaggio. And, he was close with Billy Martin. He was so close with Phil Rizzuto. And now, of course, as we move forward in time, these guys are slowly passing on and moving on. And Yogi really represents that last great connection to those types of players. And in a sense, it's just sad to think about that this whole generation has now moved on, in a sense.
And one of those single-digit numbers that really taught Yogi about the game and really helped prepare him was Bill Dickey, who also wore number 8. Showed him how to catch the baseball, how to become a game caller, and just prepared him for that. Was a coach on the Yankee staff in the 40s and the 50s. And Yogi Berra became one of the most celebrated offensive catchers in baseball history, with Bill Dickey, with Mickey Cochran. And Mickey Mantle's dad actually named Mickey Mantle after Mickey Cochran, who won the batting title in 1936. So there was that connection there. And when you have a number like that that's retired twice, the Yankees ended up retiring number 8 twice, of course. That's something that's very rare to see a number in sports retired twice by the same team. The only one that comes to mind for me is Jackie Robinson and Mariano Rivera. Jackie Robinson, of course, because of Major League Baseball, and Mariano Rivera because of what he did with the Yankees and just his career itself. So that's something that's pretty special, and there really isn't that many heroes and that many icons left from that era, from the 40s to the 50s. And Yogi Berra really connected it when you think about it, because he played about an 18, 19-year career, and then it went on as a coach in the 70s, coached in the 80s with the Yankees, was fired as manager, and then he coached around baseball. He was away from the game, but then he comes back in the late 90s during that Yankees run, and he was always made a frequent appearances at Yankee Stadium, really replacing what Joe DiMaggio did before DiMaggio passed, where he would drop ceremonial first pitch on opening day, be there for every big event, every old-timers day, be announced last. That was something that was special. And in the last couple of years, in the waning years with Yogi, with his health failing, you didn't see him as much at Yankee Stadium for some of those big events, those big moments. And it just seemed like it was going to be any day now that he was going to go. But it's hard to fathom that someone, the path that he led and the footsteps that he led with, that he's no longer with us.
Yeah, and I just think, it's amazing because, to say this respectfully, you had to be at least 65, 70 years old to remember Yogi Berra playing, and even older than that to remember him really playing in his prime at his peak. So it's really amazing when you think about how many people today are remembering him who never even saw him on the field as a player. Of course, people saw him coach. People remember him. People remember him more, though, for his legacy and for all his Yogiisms and all his appearances, because people knew that when he was on the field at Yankee Stadium for some sort of event, you were truly in the company of a legend, of greatness, of something you will not, future generations will not get to see. It's amazing as we go forward in baseball. We always think, can there be a next Babe Ruth? Can there be a next Yogi Berra? There's one thing for sure: there will never be another Yogi Berra. And Yogi Berra was just an absolute, I hate to keep saying legend, but just a legendary figure that did so much for the game, so much for humanity, so much for this country. And personally, it's amazing. Just I remember seeing Yogi at Old Timers Day a bunch of times. As you said, I remember I wasn't in attendance, but the final game at Yankee Stadium, I believe he was one of the last people announced. They went position by position announcing all the great Yankees in attendance for that final game at the original Yankee Stadium. And, of course, when they got the catcher, Yogi Berra came out fully dressed in a throwback uniform, in a uniform that he probably wore while he was playing, so head to toe in pinstripes with the number 8 on his back. And there's just that shot of him standing alone with a standing ovation from the original Yankee Stadium. And this is, of course, 2008. This is still so many years after his playing career, and people were still so grateful and thankful for everything that he had done. And then even personally, I just remember there was a Yogi Berra bobblehead night 2 years ago, and he surprised the crowd. He ended up showing up. He was holding the bobblehead in his hand, and everyone was cheering for him. I've never seen a person be I've never seen a person more revered and celebrated and honored and respected more than Yogi Berra. And this is truly the end of an incredible life. Again, it's an opportunity, though, to think of all the great things he did, all the great memories. And, as long as we're still here, we will never forget what Yogi Berra did for the game. And, his learning center, his museum, the Hall of Fame, the National Baseball Hall of Fame, they will not let Yogi's legacy go away. And it's a sad day for Major League Baseball, but also one to think and remember just an incredible life. And this isn't a Yogi Berra quote, but it's always, don't be sad that it's over, be happy that it happened. And I think we should just always keep that in mind when anyone passes away that we love so much, but especially with Yogi Berra, with all that he did. we are so grateful to have had him for as long as we did, and we are so grateful for everything that he brought us.
Yogi began in St. Louis, and that's where it all started for him. He grew up across the street from the fabled broadcaster Joe Garagiola. They were good friends. And the Cardinals were considering signing both Yogi Berra and Joe Garagiola, and Branch Rickey actually thought that Joe Garagiola was a better player. And he decided to sign him for $500, spurned by the Cardinals. Yogi ended up signing with the Yankees. He began in 1947 with them. His first full season, 1946, he was called up. He had about 22 plate appearances in 46 and 47. He had over 290, and that's where it all started for him. Compiled 358 home runs, 430 runs batted in, 348 on base, 285 batting average, 482 slugging percentage, 830 OPS. The 1950 season is the one that everybody points to, where he just walked 12 times and 597 at-bats, which is unfathomable.
Wow.
You had this year Mike Zunino striking out 12 times in 6 games, the Mariner catcher. Just put that into perspective. 12 strikeouts and 656 total plate appearances if you include walks. That year he batted .322, 28 home runs, 124 RBIs, third in the MVP voting. He finished from 1950 to 1956, third, first, fourth, second, first, and second. The Yankees averaged 98 wins. They went 5-1 in the World Series. And the only other athlete that I could think of that has won more championships than Yogi Berra and might be as celebrated as him in his sport is Bill Russell with the Boston Celtics in the 50s and 60s when they won 11 championships. That's the only one that I could think of that even compares to the success that the Yankees have and being a part of it. Berra won 10 out of the 27 world titles. It's just over 40%.
Yeah, I mean, and when you think about it, I mean, yeah, just there's so many. When you look at his baseball card, it's just unbelievable. All the things that he was just such an amazing player too. When you really get down to the player that he was, I mean, as durable of a catcher as they come. I mean, I think there was a stat today that I never knew about. I think he caught over 100 doubleheaders. He caught both games, all those innings, 100 times. More than 100, I'm sure. I think it was 120 or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But he was so durable, a stocky player, and, people called him a bad ball hitter, a guy who will hit a pitch out of the, from the dirt or hit a pitch up above his head and still find a way to get on base. And, Yogi was always asked, they call you a bad ball hitter, but to him it looked good. So he just so much power. He really, I mean, every catcher that followed him in baseball just tried to be like him. And, there's such a great list of catchers in the history of the game. People will argue that Mike Piazza might be the greatest offensive catcher of all time. People throw in votes for Pudge-Ivan Rodriguez for being the best defensive catcher of all time. I think if you're talking about the total package, Yogi Berra was it. And I think Yogi Berra, well-deserved of the Hall of Fame, and his stats just trump so many others. And it's unfortunate that all I can go off of is his stats and some grainy footage, because there is nothing I would rather do than to find a DeLorean, hop in it, get up to 88 miles an hour, and just see that era of Yankees baseball, see Yogi Berra in color in the original Yankee Stadium. His career, that era of Yankees baseball, is as historic and improbable as there will ever be in sports. And his passing really signifies the end of that era, the connections to that era. You're just blown away. Everything you read about him, you just keep getting blown away and fascinated by the life he lived. And I just wanted to also share that one story that I have to give credit to Michael Kay for bringing this up today on his show on ESPN 98.7 FM. He brought up the story of how Yogi Berra and Phil Rizzuto are always very close. This is just to demonstrate the type of person Yogi Berra was. Phil Rizzuto, in his final days, in his final weeks of his life, he was in an assisted living center. Yogi Berra would drive down from his home every single day to hang out with Rizzuto, essentially, and play cards with him. And he would apparently hold his hand every night he fell asleep, because Phil Rizzuto, Michael Kay said, Yogi knew that he was very scared, he was very sick, that he knew he didn't have much time left, and Yogi would make sure to be by his bedside every single night and say goodnight to him and hold his hand, and it just shows you the type of human being he was. He just was so loving and so caring, has such a large family that all love him so much, and there's Yogi Berra there's no words to describe him. There just really isn't. He is one of a kind. He was one of a kind, and I'm looking forward to continue reading about him, learning about him even further, and really being able to tell my kids and their kids can tell their kids that about his legend, and hopefully it'll live on forever.
And what really struck me when Michael Kay was telling that story today on the radio was how he broke down in tears, talking about how Yogi was by Phil Rizzuto's bedside on his last days at the assisted living facility. They were very tight. They were very close. Him, Phil Rizzuto, Whitey Ford, Billy Martin, they were all incredibly Mickey Mantle as well. And Mickey Mantle, Billy Martin, Yogi Berra, and Phil Rizzuto, they ended up buying property in the 1950s in Florida, thinking that they were going to all live together once they retired, and that's really where they were going to reside. And everybody but Yogi sold their shares in Florida. And Yogi steadfastly held on to it, and started going up in value as a real estate boom. Kept climbing higher and higher and higher. And then at some point he decided he was going to sell it, and the piece of land that he was holding was the site of where Walt Disney World resides in Orlando. And that, I thought, was just such an incredible story, because you look at all the on-the-field accomplishments with Yogi, but he did so much marketing himself. He was one of the first players to have an agent. So when you had owners and general managers like George Weiss looking at his contract and trying to squeeze every dollar out of it, Yogi was able to assess his value. He was able to set that path for future ball players. He was able to market with doing different commercials. He did the Aflac commercials. He did a commercial for Miller Lite in the 80s with a young Jason Alexander. He also did one with Yoo-Hoo. And to get that endorsement deal and to get future ones, he wanted a partial stake in the company instead of getting paid up front. So that was something that was a lot different. And in the 1950s, one thing when you talk about legends and you talk about how these guys were revered and looked at as larger than life, playing in New York helped. A couple of weeks ago, Frank Gifford, the New York Giants running back and former Monday Night Football broadcaster, he also passed away. And when you looked at his career, he was able to make a career because he played in the same era as Yogi in New York, and all the advertising agencies, all Madison Avenue was there, and they were able to market these guys because they were champions. These were guys that were able to win, and they liked being in the spotlight, and they liked talking to people. They were personable. So it's something that really struck me, and Pat Summerall was also like that in the NFL, former Giants place kicker and also a broadcaster. And it was the same thing with Yogi, appearing in commercials and being able to be in front of the camera and be able to be in that spotlight, and nothing just ever fazing him. And then after that, he was able to make a second career, staying in the game, becoming the manager of the Yankees. This was after he played. He was a catcher for most of his career. You mentioned that. He ended up moving to the outfield. He was in left field when Ralph Terry threw that pitch to Bill Mazeroski. You see number 8 going back to the wall with the ivy in Forbes Field. Mm-hmm. Just that picture. And then he played the last couple of years in left field, and he was able to be a mentor for Elston Howard, who ended up taking his position at catcher. In 1964, he becomes the Yankee manager, replacing Ralph Houk, who becomes a general manager, leads the Yankees to a 7-game finish. They end up losing to Bob Gibson and the Cardinals. And what's strange in that game is, after that game, he ends up getting fired. As a rookie manager, despite everything that he's done, Ralph Houk was not happy with the way he managed the bullpen. This was also a time of distress with the Yankees. They were getting older. CBS was about to purchase the ball club. there were a lot of changes, and they replaced Yogi with Johnny Keane, who was the manager of the Cardinals. The same Cardinal team that just beat the Yankees in the '64 World Series. And Yogi ended up making a name for himself, going to the New York Mets, replacing Casey Stengel and being there and being a coach, and ended up replacing Joe Hodges as Mets manager in 1973 and leading them to the World Series, falling one game short. And then he came back, as you mentioned, to become a Yankee coach. And then after that, he decided, after the Yankees fired him as manager, he wanted to stay in baseball. And John McMullen, who was once a former limited partner with George Steinbrenner, who once said that there's nothing more limited than being a partner of George Steinbrenner, became the owner of the Houston Astros. And because they were good friends, he offered Yogi Berra a spot on the coaching staff. And Yogi was on that coaching staff. Al Rosen was also a guy that was one of Steinbrenner's advisors who went with to Houston also. And Yogi was on that staff, finished 2 wins short of the World Series in 1986. Some argue that if Mike Scott would have had a chance to pitch Game 7, because he already beat the Mets twice in the LCS, that they would have gotten to the World Series. He stayed in baseball as a coach through 1989. And so for 40 years and about 2 generations, he was a staple in the game itself, not just off the field, but on the field as well.
Yeah, and that was always something that really fascinated me, that Yogi really, if there's one thing that you look at his baseball career, it's that, as a manager, he had these great successes of leading the Yankees to the World Series, leading the Mets to the World Series, yet overall, he didn't really stick with them for too long. You figure that he had the potential to be such a great manager as well, and he was for certain seasons, but obviously not for so long. But the thing about Yogi too, 90 years old, that's just such a long life, and think of all the things he's seen, and just all the things he's gone through, and all the baseball he's watched. It reminds me of Don Zimmer's passing last year, that this is a guy who was just a baseball lifer. His whole life was dedicated to the game of baseball and giving back and just being a good person. And, Yogi, I also remember just another thing, growing up as a kid, I remember one of my favorite TV commercials was an Aflac commercial with Yogi Berra in a barbershop discussing, insurance, and I remember the Aflac duck and just Yogi was a character right up until the end, and even there's just so many different stories. We're not even necessarily Yogiisms, but just the way he would talk, and his center stage special on the Yes Network with Michael Kay, such a great interview with him, such a good look inside his life. There's just so many things you can say about Yogi Berra, and I'm so grateful to have at least been able to see him, in his last years of his life, and to experience some days when he was at Yankee Stadium and to be in attendance. There was nothing more special than his name being announced last at Old Timers Day. He gets a great ovation, and he's going to be missed a lot. He really is. There's no doubt about that. He was always a guy people were talking about and concerned about and caring about, and seeing the Yankees honor him with a black number 8 patch on their jerseys in tonight's game against the Blue Jays was pretty jarring, just because this was a guy so full of life, who lived such a long life, and you almost didn't think that a guy like this could pass away, but he has indeed, and it's incredibly sad, but at the same time, this last half hour we've just been talking about all these great things he did, great parts of his life, and it's a life to be celebrated. I'm looking forward to the coming weeks, where probably so many more things will come out, and so many more people will talk about how Yogi Berra touched their individual lives, and hopefully sometime soon I can get up to the Yogi Berra Museum and Learning Center and learn exactly what he wanted me to learn, which was, the great game of baseball and everything that it offers.
And I think it's eerie, a couple of things. Michael Kay was mentioning about last night, Carlos Beltran hit the home run, and it's deja vu all over again. And then that was one of the famous Yogiisms that he had. And a couple hours later, he passes away. And he talked about strife that there was between Yogi Berra and George Steinbrenner. And I was thinking about this quote because now Yogi passed away. He always said, always go to other people's funerals, otherwise they won't come to yours. So that's probably one of the reasons that he did bury the hatchet with Steinbrenner. And then within about 10, 15 years, they passed away. And that museum is located in Montclair, New Jersey. It's not far from the ballpark where the New Jersey Jackals play. That's called Yogi Berra Stadium. And his legacy and memory will always be remembered there. And I know a couple of the broadcasters there, Michael Cohen and Nick Delahanty. Nick works for us at Baseball Central, and they call the games for the Jackals, and they're always thinking about Yogi Berra Stadium. Now that they're going to be walking into that next year, they're always going to have in their minds about Yogi and about what he contributed to baseball, especially in that area. You mentioned at the museum, Buster Posey visited a couple of years ago, and Yogi gave him some tips. And that was a great thing, I think, with Yogi, was how he was able to connect with the younger generation of players, whether it was Nick Swisher, Jabba Chamberlain, Derek Jeter, John Flaherty, whoever was around at that, just in that era in the last 10, 15 years, he was able to connect with that. And that there wasn't any generation gap, that there wasn't anything. We always talk about old school versus new school in baseball and everything like that. And Yogi was always able to just interact with them and be able to be part of that pop culture. And we talked about the Aflac commercial. Another one that really struck me was this Visa check card commercial that he did. I think it was in Super Bowl 37. That one premiered, and it was with Yao Ming, and they were saying not Yo, Yao. The cashier in that commercial was kept saying Yo. And he said at the end, it's no, it's Yogi. And that was something that I also remember with just him just doing that commercial and being in that spotlight. And just there's so many different memories of him. And
he really made people laugh, too. I mean, he just was such a character. I think that's what you don't have in the game, Brian, as much anymore. Everybody talks about the corporate feel. Everybody talks about how there's just so much on the line, so much invest. Every quote is under the microscope. You have social media. People tweet out things, and they might say the wrong thing. Yogi Berra never said the wrong thing. He always said something that was funny, that was heartfelt, and something that you always thought about that might have sounded odd, but it made a lot of sense. And that's really what it was. It just had that lightness, that humor about him, and it helped with that camaraderie with his teammates and be able to keep the clubhouse loose, and also help with a team like the 73 Mets, like the 77 Yankees that were a bit uptight, also the 78 Yankees when Billy Martin got fired and Bob Lemon took over, just things like that. And just his personality and his character really helped in those different situations. And it was just something that everybody remembered about Yogi. Yogi was one of the last ones to play in the original Yankee Stadium, to play in an era before expansion, to play obviously an era before free agency, to play a schedule for 162 games. That's something that also you think about, that the way baseball changed. He played at a time before there were African Americans in the game. He played at a time where there were only 16 teams, before there was 4 tiers of playoffs. And he played when he'd make $50,000 to $65,000 a year and have to work on the off season full time as well. I mean,
it was just a different game, and there aren't many people left from that era. The game has changed so much, and he was able to adapt so well to it, and that was something that always stuck with me too.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing that he did, I mean, he really, he transcended generations. I mean, you didn't have to see him play to have these memories and to have this great appreciation for him. And Yogi it's just weird. He's one of those guys where it's going to take a long time to adjust and to talk about him in the past tense. I mean, it's one of those losses where it's really surreal and it's very sad. And I'm just looking forward to the coming weeks and looking forward to his memorial service. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. Probably a lot of great speakers. I'm looking forward to the Yankees returning home, I think tomorrow night for their first game at Yankee Stadium since his passing. The Yankees, of course, are right in the thick of a playoff race. Michael Kay mentioned that possibly last night's game, in which the Yankees won in extra innings, thanks to Greg Bird's 3-run home run, of course, Beltran's game-tying home run. That could have been the last game. Yogi Berra was known to watch almost every Yankee game every season, so that could have been the last game he watched. So he went to sleep and passed away after a great Yankees win, and they're right in the thick of a playoff race. And not to in any way spin this in the direction of talking about this year's team, but I'm sure, you know, in that clubhouse, in that organization, they'd want nothing more than to do something special in October for him.
The New York Yankees and Hal Steinbrenner released a statement earlier today that said, Yogi Berra's legacy transcends baseball. Through slight in stature, he was a giant in the most significant of ways through his service to his country, compassion for others, and genuine enthusiasm for the game he loved. He has always been a role model and a hero that America could look up to. While his baseball wit and wisdom brought out the best in generations of Yankees, his imprint on society stretches far beyond the walls of Yankee Stadium. He simply had a way of reaching and relating to people that was unmatched. That's what made him such a national treasure. On behalf of my family and the entire Yankees organization, we extend our deepest condolences to Yogi's family, friends, and loved ones. And now with Yogi's passing, who is really left to be able to take that torch and be the ambassador and be able to be that guy from those Yankee teams? The only guys that are coming to mind for me are Whitey Ford and Bobby Richardson. There really isn't that many guys left that had that cachet and that stature that Yogi had to be able to just be able to represent that generation, especially now. It's just hard to fathom.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, you think about it. I mean, we're in 2016, and you know, as you said, I mean, all these legends have moved on and have gone on to a better place. And I mean, it's really you know, as you said, with Whitey Ford and Don Larson, Bobby Richardson, these are the last. This is it. These are the guys who you have left to ask about these firsthand accounts of all these legendary events, and then, you know, once they are gone, it just becomes history in a history book. You know, we are still fortunate to have them around. We were fortunate to have Yogi around for so long to always tell these stories. You know, just personally, I'm just a firm believer of just having these discussions with them and talking about it with them and not leaving any stone unturned, because you will regret it one day. And I don't think there's one thing that Yogi never talked about. I think Yogi gave his opinion on anything and everything, and it's all documented, and all his Yogiisms will never be forgotten. And you know, if there's someone you want to talk to, just go and do it, because you just never know, and you'll always be wondering the rest of your life if you don't get that chance. So just specifically though, yes, with this generation is dying out, and it is very sad, but there are still a group of players left, and there are still tons of stories to be shared about Yogi, about this era of baseball. And you know, once those stories are told, they can be passed on generation to generation, and you know, they'll never, you know, maybe we can slow down those stories becoming history and still keep them alive and present in our hearts and in our minds.
And we talk about just that generation, 1950s, that was what they call the golden age of baseball. Yogi Berra represented the golden age of baseball and our greatest generation. When you look at the accomplishments that he did as a wartime hero, Hakeem Olajuwon of the Houston Rockets once said, "You can't measure the heart of a champion, you could only feel it. With Yogi Berra, you felt it." And for the last time, it's time to say goodbye to Yogi Berra. Thanks for joining us. For Brian Danuff, my name is Gershon Rabinowitz. You could follow Brian on @Brian Danuff. You could follow me on my personal account @GershonLine. You can follow Baseball Essential @BB_Essential. And for the latest in baseball itself, news, opinions, anything you need to know, you can always log on to baseballessential.com. Thanks for joining us. Time to say goodbye. We will talk to you soon.